that I got to the United States Senate when two great guys represented the state, a fellow named Pastore and a fellow named Rivercroft. And I go back to the days in '72 when I got elected as a 29-year-old kid. And there used to be a lot of good fights back in those days, but very seldom were they put in personal context. Very seldom did we ever criticize another person's motive. We criticize their judgment. And I tell the story all over the country and in my home state, wherever I am. There used to be more than half of my colleagues in the Senate, when they said something to you, all they had to do was shake their head. And I'm not joking about this, I'm being literal. And that was the deal. They made a commitment, their circumstances may have changed politically, it was difficult to keep the commitment, but they kept the commitment. There's only 3 people left in the United States Senate who do that. There are a lot of good people, only 3. And the phrase I always, when I introduce Chris, and I used to talk about him on the campaign trail, because we truly are close friends. Chris Dodd is the tradition of his father, and the tradition of the great men and women I've worked with. Chris Dodd is the real deal. Whatever he says, he does. If I had known you were going to introduce Chris, I would have had Jill here. Because my wife would never do that for me. I'm also an Irish Catholic, but I made a mistake. I married a Presbyterian. They believe in predestination, and I'm not into destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of very great people here, many of whom I've known for years. It's nice to be back and see them. But I want to start off by saying that I really resent the hell out of Chris Dodd screwing up and losing the nomination. Because, ladies and gentlemen, it was my one chance to be in cabinet. It was my one chance to make something of myself. And he had to go and screw it up and not win. If you notice, I say to the 4 congresspersons that are here, the only pin I'm wearing is Rosie. That's because like you aren't scared to death of it. I'll do anything to get Rosie to love me again. She used to think I was wonderful until Chris announced. And then all of a sudden, I forgot even tried. We go back a long way, Rose and I. She's the only reason Chris ever made it. And I want to tell you, if you ever wonder whether some of this is in the blood, my kid, my number 2 son, was going to law school in New Haven. And I came up with my brother, and he was married after having done a year in his Jefferson volunteer corps after Georgetown. And we helped him move in. And the place he moved in was a god-awful place. So my brother, who knows everything, we went to the local version of the Home Depot, wherever it was, and we decided to paint the entire apartment they were moving in one day. It was about 90 degrees. It was late August. Next thing I know, up rolls a big Lincoln Continental. It's a God-2-story. And out of the Continental comes a woman, 2 women actually. One of them was the councilman, I guess, where they slide on all of them. And I'm on a ladder in a pair of shorts, otherwise stark naked, perspiring. And this woman comes in and says to me, said, "Hey kid," you couldn't see me, "can you tell me where Biden is?" Senator Biden. And I said, "I'm Senator Biden." She said, "No, where is he?" I swear to God. She said, "I'm Senator." I said, "I'm Senator Biden. I'm Joe Biden." She said, "Well, I'm Rosa Laura's mom. I brought you pizza." 20 minutes later, later, a guy knocks on the door. He says, I said, hello. I said, who is he? He said, the chief of police. With the chief of police. He walks in and he says, look, your son needs a part-time job over here, let me know. I tell you what, Rosa, you come by naturally. I want to stay on your side. And John and Chris and Joe, you're doing a great, great job. And I also want to, I know this is the worst part for the rest of the audience where we're recognizing one another here, and I apologize for this, but I want to thank General Blumenthal. He is probably the finest Attorney General in the country, but the reason I like him so much, my son's Attorney General as well, but I want to say, you know the old expression in Connecticut Democrats, do me a favor and I appreciate it. Do my son a favor and I'll never, ever, ever forget it. He helped my son win a very tough electoral fight in 2006. And he's essentially, he won't say this, but he's been sort of a tutor to my son. And my son has initiated many successful programs that General has initiated here. And for that, General, I want to thank you. And Nancy, thank you for having me tonight. I truly appreciate it. And also, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, probably the wisest thing you ever did is decide not to run again. He was saying, he looked at Chris and said, you look good. And I looked at Chris and I said to the speakers, because we don't have real jobs. You got a real job. You'll look much better in retirement. But thank you for your service. And one last recognition, if I may. A fellow who's become a friend of mine stepped up for me in a difficult time when there were a lot of good candidates out there running. And not the least of which was Chris. But Vin Roberti. Vin Roberti served in the legislature here from 76 to 84, and then did what we all talked about doing, went out and really became a success. And I want to thank you, Vin, because Vin accommodated my being able to come here. I got a little appointment tomorrow morning at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital for a little operation, no big deal. Just knocked me out for a week or so. But the point is, I couldn't have done it without Vin providing the transportation for the party. So Vin, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, to state the obvious, the next President of the United States has an awesome responsibility, but also, I would argue, the greatest opportunity since any president, since Franklin Roosevelt. An opportunity not only to change the direction of the country, but in a literal sense, to change the direction of the world. Not to make it a utopia, but to literally change the trajectory this administration has us on in the world. So much is at stake. Our national security, the physical security of our children, retirement security of our parents, the economic security of our families. If we don't get it right in Iraq, our children and our grandchildren will be fighting there a generation from now. If we don't solve, if we're unable to solve the health care crisis today, now, God knows when that consensus will arrive again. If we don't get the education system in place that begins to reflect the realities of the 21st century, it'll be a generation before we get it done. And if we don't end, as Chris has been the leader in attempting to do, George Bush's assault on our civil liberties, we will forfeit a piece of our soul. Like me, you've heard in the 35 years I've been a senator how each election is so critical. But I believe from a historical perspective, it can be said without fear of contradiction, this is the single most important election any one of you in this room will ever have voted in. The single most important. Because after In 5 decades, the middle class is truly wondering about, literally, not figuratively, whether or not they'll be able to leave to their children what they inherited from their parents. This administration has dug America into a very, very deep hole, with very few friends around the world to help pull us out. And so, the American people, as they look at this election, understand full well. They articulate it in different ways, but they understand full well that we're going to face a very difficult decade. But I believe, as you do, that with a Democratic president and with a Democratic Congress willing to tell the American people the truth, there's nothing that they cannot handle. I believe that if we use the power of our principles and our ideals instead of the force of our arms alone, we can literally begin to reshape the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I, like Chris, and my responsibilities on the Foreign Relations Committee, travel the world a great deal. The world is hungry for American leadership. You know, I don't know how many times as a young senator I'd attend conferences like I did. I delivered a paper to the European Union on Saturday in Europe. I don't know how many times I sat through those meetings, Chris, and particularly our French friends would talk about how naive we were and how sophisticated Europe was. Well, our naivete, our clinging to our ideas and ideals, allowed them to bask in their cynicism. But ladies and gentlemen, the moment we became as cynical as they are, it scared the living hell out of us. Literally, this is not hyperbole. Literally, the single most important election that's going to take place in France, in Britain, in Germany, in Portugal, in Israel, in Pakistan, in China, in Japan, in the next several years, is the election for our president. That's the single most consequential event. They resent the hell out of our power, but they know the truth of what Madeleine Albright said without any bravado. We are the essential nation. We're the only catalyst that has the capacity and the hope to maybe put the world back on track. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all share the conviction, those of us in politics, that our tomorrows are going to be better than our yesterdays. But ladies and gentlemen, there's been a missing ingredient over the last 8 years, unrelated to the partisan side of this. The incompetence and the arrogance has been astonishing. Literally astonishing. Not only to the eyes of Democrats, but to the eyes of Republicans as well. It's been astonishing. And ladies and gentlemen, things are about to change. They're going to change in an incredible way, not merely because we have 2 great potential nominees, but because of the moment we find ourselves in. I would argue that not the 500 times in American history we've been at such a junction. The American people have literally closed a chapter in the history of America on what was wrought by President Reagan. Just like they closed a chapter on the New Deal in 1980. In 2006 and 2008, they're closing a chapter on so-called compassionate conservatives. They have wholesale rejected the foreign and domestic policy of this administration. So ladies and gentlemen, whether it's Hillary or Barack, 2 incredibly talented and gifted and inspirational candidates, both of whom have harnessed a sort of undefinable energy that I've not seen in presidential politics since I was a kid and John Kennedy was the nominee. They've harnessed it for what the public is looking for, what are they going to do with it? What are we as a party going to do with this? If I had gone to sleep in 1972 or had gone into a coma after being elected senator at 29 in 1972, and I awakened from that coma in 2008, and I looked around at my daughter and I said, honey, what's going on in America? And she said, Daddy, there's a gifted woman and a gifted African American. One of them is going to be the Democratic nominee. In a literal sense, not in a figurative sense, I would have said, thank God. Thank God. Because it's stamped into the DNA of the Democratic Party. It's the reason why I got involved in the Civil Rights Movement. My state was to exchange segregated by law. My state was long in recovery from its sad history of slavery. It's the reason I got engaged. When I ran in 1972, it was about the women's movement. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a historic moment at a historic juncture in American political history. The only regret I have is Chris and I didn't realize that before we announced. But all kidding aside, as you well know, Barack and Hillary are pretty busy right now. And by the way, count me in as one of the people who does not view this as a debacle. Let me remind you all, Chris is a really close friend and my very close friend, Ted Kennedy, with less than 1,000 delegates, took a sitting president to the convention floor. And the party did not disintegrate. There was no 1968. There were no riots in the streets and the press is talking about comparing the next Democratic convention. That is a bunch of malarkey. That's the press. Would it be better if we had our candidate for certain now? Probably. But do you think we would have registered 215,000 new Democrats in my home state of Pennsylvania? I doubt it. Do you think we would have generated the kind of enthusiasm that exists now? I doubt it. So I am one of those who has announced and speaks with both the candidates regularly, but I want to tell you something. I am absolutely convinced whoever the nominee is, the party will rally. I know it doesn't seem that way now, but the options are so egregious. The possibility of not winning back the White House is so profound that those who call themselves Democrats and the vast majority of independents are going to rally around the Democratic nominee. And I predict whoever the loser is will rally around the winner. So folks, give this a little bit of time. Don't play the press argument that this is going to be some great kind of disaster. Don't make it a self-fulfilling prophecy. The reason I mention it is that, as a consequence of this really tough fight for the nomination going on considerably longer than I had anticipated, Chris, I thought Super Tuesday would be over, to be honest with you. In the meantime, my friend, and as we say in the business, he is my friend, John McCain. John McCain is getting what some might call a free pass. So I think it's incumbent upon those of us, like my 4 House colleagues and my Senate colleague, while the candidates are focusing, in some senses, unfortunately, on one another, that we do not allow the Republicans and John McCain to have a pass. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm spending my time the best I can do it. I'm spending my time continuing reminding people in any fora I can find just how stark the choices are, regardless of whether it's Hillary or Barack, relative to John McCain. Because, ladies and gentlemen, as some of you know, last month, Senator McCain set out his vision for American foreign policy. To be honest, which is something we're not encouraged to do in politics these days, but to be honest, to his credit, John McCain attempted to distinguish himself to repudiate some aspects of the Bush foreign policy, naming one torture, for example. But, ladies and gentlemen, Senator McCain shares the Bush administration's myopic view of a world defined by terrorism and a foreign policy driven by fear. The fact of the matter is, no matter what John McCain says on the edges, John McCain is a clone of President Bush on every issue. Hyperbole suggests that we need a total change in the White House's worldview, not a moderate change. And that will require more than a great soldier. It will require a wise leader. And nowhere is that truer than in Iraq. Notwithstanding the fact the economy is listed as the most important issue in the minds of the American people, the war dominates our national life. It stands like a boulder sitting in the middle of the road, preventing us from regaining the flexibility to deal with our economy, healthcare, education. It stands in the way as long as we are spending $12 billion a month. Does anybody in this room believe that there is any possibility of getting national health care as long as we're spending $150 billion a year in Iraq? Does anyone believe the very things that made each of us Democrats? And it wasn't foreign policy. It was our concern for the poor, the sick, the disadvantaged, minorities. Does anybody believe we can get to our agenda and fulfill that agenda without dealing with Iraq? And does anyone believe we will have the credibility to deal with the other changes the world is undergoing now, as long as the world looks at us and sees us in such incredible disarray in Iraq? Ladies and gentlemen, there's an old bad joke my baseball coach in college used to tell. Turned out it was Leo DeRoche's joke. I didn't know it at the time. He told the story, it's a true story. He told me when I was a freshman about, we had a star center fielder, we're going to change his name. His name is George. In the first 3 innings, according to my coach, a star center fielder committed 4 errors. The coach called timeout and said, "That's it, out." Chris into center field. Play resumes, first pitch, routine fly ball to Chris, hits his glove and he drops it for an error. Coach goes nuts. Calls timeout and says, "Dodd in," and as Dodd's crossing the third base line, he grabs Dodd by the number and says, "Dodd, what the hell's the matter with you?" And Chris looks at the coach and says, "Coach, George screwed up center field so badly no one can play." And ladies and gentlemen, it's a bad joke, but I promise you, I guarantee you, from first-hand, person-to-person discussion with dozens of heads of state, they don't want to be involved with us as long as we are mired down with such a failed policy in Iraq. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to deal with Iraq. It must be done. Yates once said, speaking in another context, he said, "Too long a suffering makes a stone to the heart." But we're needlessly asking too few Americans to suffer for much too long. Over 4,000 fallen angels. That's to the military when you fly back in these cargo planes. I've been to Iraq a dozen times. You get in the plane, C-130s. And unfortunately, almost every trip, there's a coffin, a flag-draped coffin, or more than one strapped to the floor, turning that cavernous hull into a cathedral. 4,000 plus dead. Over 29,000 wounded. Over 14,300 mortally wounded, requiring intensive medical care for the rest of their lives. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Democrats, this war must end. Senator John McCain likes to talk about the dire consequences of significantly drawing down our forces in Iraq. But I believe they're exactly wrong about those consequences. And so do the vast majority of the prominent, retired military and national security experts. Over a dozen of whom testified before our committee 3 weeks ago. They argued the exact opposite, that by drawing down significantly American forces, we take away Iran's ability to wage a proxy war against our troops, and we force Tehran to concentrate on how to avoid the turmoil inside Iraq's borders that will generate vast instability inside their border. They point out that by drawing down significantly American forces, the overwhelming probability is there will be no longer reason for Al-Qaeda to be in Iraq. They will be crushed by the Sunnis who've come to hate them, the Shia who never liked them, and the Kurds who loathe them. The only rationale there is for any presence of Al-Qaeda Mesopotamia, as the military refers to it, making the distinction between Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda. The only reason they have any ability to exist is because the disparate groups who are coming after us will look for any ally. Any ally. Ladies and gentlemen, the risk of drawing down may be debatable, although the overwhelming consensus among the experts of both parties is that it would benefit, not harm. But ladies and gentlemen, the cost of staying in Iraq is not debatable. It is thoroughly, totally knowable. It's the continued loss of life and limb of our soldiers. With the great success of the surge, which is now imploding, or with the great success of the surge at its high point, we moved to losing only 30 to 40 American soldiers a month, 235 to 250 seriously wounded a month, and $3 billion a week in expenditures. That is defining success way down. All the surge initially did was allow us to move from drowning to temporarily treading water. And in the meantime, the President, although our military men and women did their job, the President did nothing to provide the context for that surge, which was what? Give the warring factions, remember the phrase, breathing room to reach a political accommodation. Ladies and gentlemen, this president, and I got in trouble, as Chris will remember, and some of you remember, a year and a half ago, when I was on Meet the Press, and they said, what is the president's plan? And I said that I believe then, and I know now, that the president's only plan was to keep Iraq from imploding on his watch and hand it off to the next president, Democrat or Republican. And I was soundly criticized. There is virtually no one with their eyes open in America, in either party, that thinks that is anything other than what the plan is. It's going to take us to mid-June to draw from 160 to 140. Then there's going to be a 45-day pause, which puts us in the middle of the election cycle after September. Ladies and gentlemen, the next president of the United States is going to inherit hell. And I hate to say this, because I got a son about to be deployed, and I'm not supposed to say that. He doesn't like me saying it for a year to Baghdad. But I'm afraid that on November the 2nd, the headlines of the Hartford papers and every paper in America are going to be as dire as it relates to Iraq with death and carnage as they were 2 years ago. So ladies and gentlemen, mark my words. When it comes to Iraq, there is virtually no daylight between John McCain and George Bush. They are joined at the hip. There will be no change in Iraqi policy in the McCain administration, and there will be no recognition of the fundamental flaw of this administration is viewing everything through the prism of terror and fear. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a big deal. I commute every day from Washington to Delaware. It's a 250-mile round-trip commute. I'm able to do it mostly on Amtrak. And I do like all of you do, whether in a plane or a train at night. Retired, I look out that window. As I pass through big towns of Baltimore and small little places like Aberdeen, look out in Newark, Delaware, literally, this is not a joke. Look out the window and see those little homes out there all lighted. At 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, thought never escapes me. I wonder what they're saying at the kitchen table. They just put the kids to bed. They're sitting there, talking about what? My guess is they're talking about the same things that Americans all across the country are. They're asking questions as profound as they are ordinary. Dad just died. Should Mom move in with us? Do we have enough room? So maybe we have Billy and Charlie double up, and what about Mary's room? Is it safe, John, to put that computer in Sally's room? Is it safe? Because the Attorney General can tell you the click of a mouse and probably we're going to enter a closed room. What do we do? What about the fact we heard a rumor today that the company's going to cut our health care? Cost is going to go up $250 this month. How are we going to do it? Can we afford to fill up the tank tomorrow? Both cars run empty, and maybe we just each do a half a tank. And how in the hell are we going to send Billy, he's such a smart kid? He's doing so well. How in God's name are we going to send him to college? These aren't poor folks. These are people, probably both the husband and wife sit at the table, probably both of them work. And they both work 40 hours a week and they're busting their asses, excuse my slang expression. And ladies and gentlemen, what they're looking for is not a policy prescription. I don't think they vote for president based on what their 10-point program is. They're looking looking for the Democratic Party to do, and I'm not being solicitous because I love her, what Rosa does when she talks about her constituents. You talk to their heart. When someone tells you about their kid or their mother needing dialysis, you don't tell them about your health care program. The first thing you got to do is let them know you have some sense of what they're going through. Because see, I think an awful lot of these people think we forgot where most of us came from. I think they don't think we understand not only how devastating it is for a young man or woman who's a senior in high school being told by their dad, son, pal, I just can't get the tuition. Any more profoundly, they want to know that we understand how devastating and humiliating it is for that father or mother to have to say that. A lot of you heard that. I know I heard it when I was a senior in high school. I forget my father, I would have thought someone hit him in the head with a baseball bat. He went to the bar in the car at the senior prom, the place he worked. I said, "Where's Dad?" He said, "I don't know why." I walked out and he looked like something awful had happened. I said, "What's the matter, Dad?" He said, "I'm so sorry, Jim. I'm so sorry." I said, "Sorry about what?" He said, "I went to the farmer's bank, that was the state bank in Delaware, to borrow money for you to get to Delaware. And they won't lend me the money, honey. I'm so sorry." We used to talk to our constituency about those things. They used to understand that we understood. My dad used to have an expression. He said, "Champ, I don't expect the government to solve my problems. But I sure in hell expect them to understand my problem." The American people are tough. But they want the Democratic Party, in my view, in order to embrace it fully. They want to know that we understand. We got to start speaking to their hearts. Because you know what the Republicans are going to do? They're going to play to their fears, not their hopes. And they'll say, we don't share their values. Notwithstanding, I was kidding Chris, I'm going to get in trouble for doing this, hope you're not offended, Chris. But I was joking when we were saying something, and I whipped out, I said, "You know, I don't know why sometimes I carry this rosary." And he put out beads, and I don't know how he got in his pocket or something. The truth of the matter is, we don't talk about it. We don't wear it on our chest as Democrats. But the idea that these guys who confuse ideology with principles, these guys who we campaign against and campaign with, who talk about American values. Ladies and gentlemen, my dad had another expression. She said, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I will tell you what you value." How can we allow this Republican Party, and I believe neither of our candidates will allow it, to make the case that they share American values? What is a greater value? People making an average of $1.4 million a year, good people, getting another $92 billion tax cut next year? Or paying for health care for all Americans? What can be more valuable? What do Americans value? What are their priorities? Ladies and gentlemen, where does it say in the Bible that torture is a good thing? I don't remember hearing that part. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the Republican playbook is one that's about to be turned on them. When they accuse us of being weak, we'll be able to remind the American people it was George Bush who has made us weaker than any president has in modern American history. That's not Joe Biden. That's General Casey, Chief of Staff for the United States Army, who said, "Our soldiers are deploying too frequently. We can't sustain it. It's impacting their families. It's impacting their mental health. just can't keep going this way. That was General Casey, not Joe Biden. It was Admiral Mullen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who said, having forces in Iraq at the level they're at now will not allow us to meet the needs we have in Afghanistan. More Americans will die because we're unable to act. Ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't Joe Biden, but General Cody, the Vice Chairman, saying the nation needs an airborne brigade, a heavy brigade, a striker brigade ready for full spectrum operations. Unfortunately, we don't have any of them today. Our United States military is saying loudly that we are fundamentally prepared to meet any other emergency in the world because of this administration's policy. Ladies and gentlemen, when they accuse us of being out of touch and not representing the American people, we can point out that we're not about to compromise on our values, and we can define morality in generic terms of what is moral. Is it moral to provide 400,000 kids who got accepted to college but couldn't go for financial reasons? Is that more moral or less moral than continuing to give no bid contracts to major contractors in Iraq who are stealing us blind? Ladies and gentlemen, if we appear to America's better angels, as Lincoln said, not their fears, we'll do just fine this election. But my closing comment to you all is, you can't be afraid to trust the American people. A lot of us have become cynical. And you say, nah, no, we haven't. Think about it. How many times have you had the conversation in the last 3 years when someone says, you know, I trust the American people's judgment? How many of you said, how smart can they be? They elected this guy twice. All kidding aside, you said it right. Well, part of the reason is, ladies and gentlemen, we haven't leveled with the media. We haven't told them what is needed of them, what needs to be demanded of them. Our job is not merely to tell them what they want to hear, to tell them what they need to hear. Because I will conclude by saying, name me a time, name me one single time in all of American history when the American people have ever let their country down. Name me a single time. And we think things are tough now. Look at what our fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers dealt with, and how they challenged the American people, how they appealed to their better angels, and how they rose above real crises that make some of what we're going through pale by comparison. The only thing I heard, Chris, with consistency as you and I travel across the country from Democrats, the only universal criticism of our party from our party is that we're too typical. We haven't been willing to. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think the key to not only winning, because I think it's going to be very difficult to lose this next time out. Unfortunately, because of the state of the economy and the war will be. But if we want to be able to win and lead, I think we have to understand America's heart. And that sounds corny to say, but I think the next president, if he or she does not understand just how tough the American people are, how much grit and determination they have if someone attempts to lead them, I think we will be judged very harshly by history for not taking advantage of the moment. But if we understand what I think the truth of it lies in the heart of most Americans, I think the possibilities to change the world, I mean this sincerely, and I'm not new to this. I've been there for 35 years, United States Senator, for 7 presidents. And ladies and gentlemen, I mean it. other than Roosevelt and before that, Lincoln. But you gotta understand where their heart is. And Chris always kids me because I'm always quoting Irish poets. But I think that the truth lies in the hearts of the vast majority of American people, and it's best summarized, in my view, by a stanza in a poem by Shamsi Saini, who wrote a poem that won the Nobel Prize for Poetry in the mid-90s. It was called The Cure of Joy. And the stanza goes like this, and I believe this is the anthem of the American people at the moment if the leadership steps up to it. He said, history teaches us not to hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, that longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up, and hope and history rise. Please join us. Join me. Join Chris. Join our nominee. Join us in making hope and history rhyme. Not just because we can, but because we must. Ladies and gentlemen, may God bless America and may we protect our